All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about how do we show that two triangles are congruent. So let's take a look at the two pictures of Mickey Mouse here. If you look at them, these two Mickeys are exactly the same. When two things in geometry are exactly the same, whether it's two lines, two shapes, we call them congruent. So the left Mickey is exactly the same as the right Mickey, which means we can say they are now congruent. When we have shapes in geometry that are congruent, their parts are congruent. For example, Mickey's nose on the left Mickey is the same as Mickey's nose on the right Mickey. That's called a corresponding congruent part. And that brings us to this math connection down here. Something you learned in im2. CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. CPCTC. And what that simply means is what I explained earlier in the Mickey example. Since these two Mickeys are congruent, we can take any part of this Mickey, match it to the part over here, and these individual parts are congruent. Like Mickey's right shoe here is now congruent to Mickey's right shoe over here. And this is by CPCTC. And we'll show you how to do that in the next slide with triangles. So in example A, we have to decide if triangle GJH is congruent to triangle KML. And to do that, we start comparing corresponding parts. More specifically, we try to follow two rules. The first rule is we want to look at all these angles and match them with all the angles over here. That's called corresponding. And then we're going to look at their measurements and check, are these matching angles all congruent? So that's the first rule. The second rule is we are then going to compare all the matching sides in one triangle with the matching side in the other triangle and check if all the sides are the same measure. If they are, then they would be considered congruent. If these two rules are true, so all angles are the same for each matching angle, all sides are the same for each matching side, then we can say these two shapes are congruent. Let's try example A. We're going to try to check if this triangle is congruent to this triangle. So let's start with matching up angles. So let's start in this triangle here, and I'm looking at angle H just because of this symbol. I know this symbol means 90, so I want to look at the drawings and match up angle H with its partner in this triangle. If you look, angle H's partner is angle L. So these two angles are corresponding. So I can now say angle L corresponds with angle, let's do that differently, angle H corresponds with angle L. But we have to go further. Not only do they match, can we say they have the same measure? Are they congruent? So this angle is 90, this angle is 90. Since their degrees are the same, we can then say they are congruent. We then move on to the next angle. So I'm going to go in this triangle, I'm going to go to angle J. I'm going to look for angles J's matching part. And it's very important that you choose the correct angle. So angle J's matching part, based on what I see in the drawing, looks like it's going to be angle M. So we now know angle J matches with angle M. We just have to check the measurements. So J is 60, angle M is 60. Because of the same measure, we can then say they are congruent. Now we have one more angle to compare. So we go to angle G. G's here. Its matching is angle K. So let's write that down. Angle G matches with angle K. And now I want to see, do they have the same measure? So G is 30 degrees, angle K is 30 degrees. I can now say they are congruent. So we have did checklist number 1. All angles that match are equal. We now move on to part 2. We're now going to compare the sides. So let's start with side JG. So I'll highlight this here. So JG has a measure of 2. But before we look at the measures, who does JG match with? To help you out, we want to kind of remember this idea over here. The longest angle goes to the longest side, and so forth. So if you look, JG is across from 90 degrees, the longest side. So who's across from the longest, the biggest angle over here? It's going to be MK. We can now say that these two guys match because they're both across from the 90 in each case. Now let's check at their measure. Their measure is 2 and 2. So we now know that JG matches with MK, and we check their measure again, and they are the same measure. They're both 2 meters, so they are congruent. Let's do that for the rest of the sides. So we did JG. Now let's go on to another side. We'll do GH. GH is across from 60. So let's highlight this. So GH is across from 60. So we're going to go from the side across from 60, which is KL. So GH, we know, matches with KL. Now let's check if they're congruent. 1.7, 1.7, they are now congruent. So we took care of that side. We need one more side to check congruency on. So we go to JH. Again, JH is across from 30 degrees. So we look for the side across from 30. That's going to be ML. So JH matches with ML. Check their measures. 1 meter, 1 meter, they're congruent. We have checked rule number 2. Because of these 2 rules being satisfied, which I've listed here, the angles and the sides, I can now write my congruent statement. So your congruent statement will say triangle. So we put the triangle symbol, and then we start naming our triangle. So I'll do GHJ is congruent to triangle. And now here's the kicker. Let me just make some room here. We have to match up letter for letter. So for example, G matches with who over here? G, we know, matches with K based on our statement here. So K has to come first. And then we go H matches with L. And J matches with M. So J was corresponding with M. And this would be your congruent statement. So we're going to quickly explain example B. I'm going to erase all this, so get it down, and we'll talk about example B. In example B, what you'll notice is a couple things. First and foremost, we don't know anything about angles. We can match them. We can try. For example, I think angle A matches with E, but do we know anything about the measurement? Because we don't know if the angles are equal, we can't do rule number 1. We can't check if they are congruent. Therefore, based just on that alone, just the angle measures are missing, we cannot say if these are congruent. On top of that, if you look, the sides look like they match. 12.1, 12.1, 7.9, 7.9. But then you get here 8.5, 8.4. This also disqualifies it. These sides are not congruent. Therefore, these guys are not congruent. Remember, to show congruence, both rules have to be true. Okay, let's move on to example C. In example C, I want you to tell me whether these two triangles are congruent in the comments on Google Classroom. So in Google Classroom, you're going to put congruent or not congruent. Okay, so I'll let you do this one yourself. Let's move on to example D. And if you notice in example D, let's just start trying to match angles. So let's start with angle D here. Angle D visually looks like it matches angle G. And what you'll notice, they are not the same measure. Therefore, it failed rule number 1. So rule number 1 failed. These two triangles are no longer congruent. We don't even have to check anything else. As one part messes up, the whole thing is messed up. Okay, let's do example E. So this is applying the properties of congruent triangles. So our goal is to find the variable that results in the triangles congruent. So now we want to make the triangles congruent. So we still have to keep our rules in mind. So if you look over here, I pasted, what does it mean for triangles to be congruent? All the matching angles are congruent and all the matching sides are congruent. So let's look at example E. We're trying to figure out what X should be so that we can make these two triangles congruent. So since X belongs to an angle measure P, we are trying to do rule number 1. What should X be so that its matching angles are the same or equal or congruent? So to do this, we want to figure out who does angle P match with. So if you look over here, who do you think angle P matches with? So it's pretty easy to see. K matches with N, J matches with M, therefore L matches with P. So I want to figure out L. Once I know L, I can then put it equal to P. So to figure out L, we're going to use the triangle sum theorem. So we have 45 plus 55 plus angle L is equal to 180. And now we want to solve for angle L. So 45 plus 55, that's 100. And now subtract 100 from both sides. And we get the measurement of L is 80 degrees because it's an angle. So now I know that angle L is 80 degrees. Okay, And we also know that angle L and angle P should match. And because we want them to be congruent triangles, that means angle L and P should be congruent. And congruent means equal. So we're going to put their measurements equal to each other. So angle L is congruent to angle P, which means 80 is equal to 5x plus 30. And we can now solve for x. So we're going to subtract 30. We get 50 equal to 5x, divide by 5. And x is going to equal 10. So to check our answer, if we plug in x, or 10 for x, it better equal 80 degrees. So we're going to do this mentally. 5 times 10, plug it in for x, that's 50. 50 plus 30 more, that gives me 80. Now these two triangles are congruent. As you can see, all the angles will match, and these little dashes for the sides, they mean congruent. So JL is congruent to MP. JK, the side, is congruent to MN because of the two dashes. KL with 3 dashes is congruent to NP with 3 dashes. Therefore, these two triangles are congruent. Okay, go ahead and try to do example F. Pause the video. I'll work it out, but I want you to try it. Your goal is to figure out what the value of y should be so that these two triangles are congruent. So in example F, we got to make sure that we want these two things to be true. So let's look at the angles in example F. Angle A has one arc, and it matches with angle D because it has one arc. So A and D are good. They're congruent and matching. So one angle down, we need 2 more to go. Angle C has 2 dashes or 2 arcs. Therefore, it should have a matching partner, and that partner is F. It has 2 arcs. And last but not least, angle B has 3 arcs, and it matches with E with 3 arcs. So again, these arcs mean congruent. Therefore, these angles, they all have a matching and congruent partner. So rule number 1 is checked off. The angles check off. Now let's check the sides. So we have 50 AC matches with DF 50. That's one side. We have BC with 30 FE. They're both 30. They're good. Therefore, AB matches with ED. And in order for them to be congruent, these two measures have to be equal. So we're going to set them equal to each other and solve for y. So AB has to be equal to ED. And what that looks like is AB is 36 equal to ED, who is 2y plus 20. And now we solve using algebra. Subtract 20. 16 equals 2y. Divide by 2. And y is going to equal 8. So we know what y should equal. Let's just check if we got it right. So I'm going to plug in y for this mentally. And we're going to check. It should equal 36. So 2 times y is 16 plus 20 more. 16 plus 20. So I'll write it out for you. 16 plus 20. And that is going to give you 36. So we're good.